Thank you, Richard, for that introduction, and thank you everyone for having me here into Nuffield, Australia. It's a fantastic conference, and I'm very sorry I'm not here for the whole time. There's such a diverse and interesting array of topics being covered here with some fascinating people, and it makes me very excited because a lot of them don't have grey hair, and that's what I like to see too. I just wanted to talk to you today about transitioning to the next generation. So Cecil Rhodes said that if you've been lucky enough to be born Australian, then you've drawn first prize in the lottery of life. And I've fortunately been born Australian, and I love rural Australia. And one of the reasons I actually do what I do, which is quite difficult at times because, as my husband says, I voluntarily walk into family bun fights for a living. And certainly I'd like to say that rural Australia need to address this more carefully than we have. So this is just a snapshot of my family and where I live, which is also not too far from Richard's, near Tamworth. So when we contemplate succession planning, then what we're actually contemplating is actually change. And most people are fearful of change because they don't believe that they have any control over how or when it happens to them. Succession planning is an area of business management that we can prepare for, and therefore we do have a measure of control over. And what matters most is actually the attitude that we have to change. Family businesses are an essential source of prosperity, and they're also an essential source of prosperity and sustainability in both our economy and our society. And so I just wanted to give you a bit of a snapshot, and it's a very big topic, in a small space of time. When we talk about change, as Charles Darwin said, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It's the one that's the most adaptable to change. Now, this was written a long time ago, and the same can be said today. When we think about succession planning, I just want to, alert you to the fact that it needs to have context around it. When people ask us to help with succession planning, usually their businesses are quite strong in the area of production. They're often strong in the area of innovation because they have had to be to survive. They're getting better and better at marketing, but in all these other areas of their businesses, then I would say in rural Australia, we're largely getting flunking grades. We're quite weak in these areas of business management. So our financial analysis and our financial acumen is quite poor. Generally, our strategic planning isn't good enough. We don't have operating procedures in place. We're not focused on training and development. We're not really focused on having systems. Our leadership isn't valued, and we need the training, and we're not doing enough training in this area. We're not compensating formally for the labour, the management and the ownership in our businesses. And above all else, we're not putting communication platforms in place. And so without these communication platforms, we don't have an avenue for effective decision making. Now, I understand that I'm speaking to probably the upper echelon of rural Australia right now, so please don't be offended. I'm just telling you what I see in my work, which has been over 15 years. So if we are able to do this better, then succession would be but one piece of the puzzle. But currently, when people call up and ask for help today, they're usually asking for help in all of these other aspects of family business management, which they haven't been managing effectively. And that's usually because they haven't actually seen it for what it is. And so if we're actually going to do this better, we need to be managing these aspects of our business so that succession, which is a perpetual process in our businesses, is actually seen as one part of the puzzle, not this overwhelming monolith that most of us don't want to go near. So why is succession planning so complex, and what are the use? It's actually about transition planning. And when we think about transition, the first thing we need to be thinking about is actually the transition of management. So it's who's going to do what when. And I guess that's a part that's often overlooked and not something that we start early enough. Often people leave it till some random date in the future, which might be a date of death or disability, for the management of transition, the transition of management to begin. So that's where we should be starting, is in actually identifying where leadership sits or may sit going forward and then preparing those people to take over those positions so that we're preparing our businesses ahead of the game rather than leaving it too late. And secondly, it's about leadership transition. And leadership transition is probably the most complex aspect of succession, and one that's often overlooked. And the reason that it's really complex is that it actually contemplates personality difference in dealing with it well, and it deals in psychology and how we can actually effectively ensure that a person who is currently, or people who are currently leaders, can feel purposeful and fulfilled in the remainder of their lives, regardless of whether they are actually doing the grunt work in their businesses. And so I think it's important that we get down and to have these difficult conversations more readily than we have been, and it's actually an aspect that's been overlooked. And lastly comes ownership transition. When people are positional, as we say in psychology, about ownership, it usually is a symptom of people not being clear about how transition is going to happen in any aspect of the business. Ownership generally, I find, doesn't matter as much to people coming through in the next generation as people think, except where the conversations haven't been had and the clarity doesn't exist. But ownership needs to be dealt with an estate plan, which is not a succession plan. So if something happens to anyone today, then clearly we know how this is going to happen. And then if we have a succession plan, if we're planning to live to be old people, and more and more of us are, then we need to have a succession plan with an estate plan sitting beside it. So a good estate plan comes out of a succession plan, and not something to be confused. Many people tell me, I've got a will, so I've done succession plan. And it's not true. It's leaving that event to some random date in the future. And when do farmers are they most likely to die? They're most likely to die when in a raging drought, when commodity prices are horrendous, when everything that could be terrible is terrible, they decide to die. And so we've left the fortunes of our future against this one random date. And we don't think about it enough. And so we need to have a plan in place which is going to happen regardless of that random date in the future. So where do we start? We start with our aspirations. And most people are quite allergic to goal setting, and they hate this. They think, oh, you can't over-plan. And sure, you can't over-plan, but we need to get clear. So if every single family member is clear about what their goals and aspirations are, then we can get clear about what the collective goals and aspirations are for a family, and then we can get clear about what the purpose is of our business. And too often people, and I won't embarrass you by asking you to tell me what the purpose of your business is, but I can tell you from experience that I've had about 2 in every 500 who can tell us what their purpose is. And when we have clear purpose, we have a greater chance of success in our family businesses. So when we are clear about our aspirations and our goals, collectively, we then can be clear about what this vehicle, which is our business, needs to deliver for us. And the sooner we can do that, the better. One thing I wanted you to have a little think about also is how the business life cycle actually overlaps with our life cycle. So when we start out in business at a founding or birth stage, and many of Australia's farmers started out with absolutely nothing. And so these businesses have grown and developed over time, and then they reach a maturation point which often coincides with us getting old. And what we see happen then is the businesses decline. So we get tired, we get grumpy, and we don't mentor well, we become more risk averse, and we are less likely to make our best decisions. And so we allow our businesses to decline while saying that we want these businesses to continue. And if we truly want them to continue, then the timeliness of transition is critical, because we need to be transitioning at our peak, not after we've allowed a decline, not after we have a bit of a heart scare or we get told we've got the big C looming. We need to do it before, so that we're actually in a position with our mind on the game and with our eye on the job, and have the capability and capacity to actually mentor this next generation as they need to be mentored. Our financial acumen is vitally important, and I'm sad to say that our financial acumen in rural Australia is poor. And so if there's one thing that we can change that will see an incredible difference in how our businesses perform with the opportunities that sit before us in agriculture right here and today, this is what we can change. We need to educate ourselves and our next generation much better in actually empowerment around this financial acumen. We're leaning on other people too much in this arena rather than actually being clear. And it's pretty simple. There's usually only 3 major drivers in our businesses, and if we focus well, then we'll actually achieve some great outcomes. And we need it not to be smoke and mirrors. There's too much smoke and mirrors in this arena. So we need to simplify it, and we need to do it ourselves, we need to understand it, and we need to teach our next generation, because this is what they need to understand. Too much assumption that because we've gone to Marcus Oldham, or we've been to Armidale, or we've been to wherever to university, that we actually had the wherewithal to apply that learning to the practical setting of our businesses. And what I'm finding is a big gap. And so therefore that financial acumen is actually lacking in the management of our agricultural businesses. So one of the aspects that really does create some confrontation in families is that family dynamics and intergenerational difference. So I just wanted to touch on those a little. We need to be clear about what the expectations are of those people in our businesses for the future, who's involved now and who's going to be involved. And we really need to be able to understand the perspective of each family member. So if I were preparing my business for the future, I would start by looking at what I thought the perspective of each family member is and truly nail that. Truly know what's in the heads and the hearts of those people. And I think that's where we fall down. We're not good at sharing. We're actually not good at really sharing and being honest with each other. And this is what I see across Australia. So the younger generation on farm are asking questions like this. We need clarity and direction about the future, so we want to know what the roadmap looks like. When are we going to be able to make some decisions? We need to be in control of our own destiny. We've got some great ideas and we'd like to try them out. What does our future hold and what can we offer our partners? How will we support a future family? What are our parents going to do and how will they be funded? Will everyone own a share of the farm and will we have to pay out siblings? Who's going to be boss when dad hands over? And what are our roles and responsibilities? So these are the questions that are being asked by young people as they enter farming family businesses today. And so if we're going to get ahead of the game, these are the questions as business owners we really need to have the answers to. For the generation off farm, they see a bit of stress usually because of a lack of communication and a lack of preparedness for transition, and they wonder what they can do about it. They often wonder what happens to mum and dad as they age. Is their future secure? And they worry about that for a couple of reasons. One, that there seem to be the high income earners in the city maybe, and so maybe that high disposable income, perceived high disposable income, is going to need to be used here in this setting, and if so, they need to know. Secondly, what's buried in that is that what they don't like to talk about is what they've been told in the past. So often they've been told, well, we need the majority of the farm assets to the farm for the farm to be viable and for the farm to continue, so what you'll get is what's not farm. So if mum and dad's future isn't secure, then what's not farm doesn't look like much. So we need to stop kidding ourselves around this aspect as well, which is how are we going to deal with inheritance? And best we deal with that early rather than later. And just because I'm not working on the farm, will anything be mine? I feel I'm entitled to something, and is that how everyone else sees it? So this is a conversation we need to have early, and to be fair to the incoming generation, we need to have this clear so that this is not a blockage to their future or a fear that sits inside their guts as they work every day. too much of that is happening. In-laws and partners of those on farm. No one else is working as hard or as long hours as my partner. Is that fair? And there might be 3 family members working in the same business, and each partner will say that. Is the business going to be able to afford to pay out off-farm family members? So we create conflict between the siblings of those people and the people that have married them or partnered with them because we haven't dealt with this. Can the business afford to provide housing for all? We're not going to be able to survive on this salary forever. That's in there because I remember that. When I married Rod 26 years ago, his taxable income that year was $11,000. I came out of the city with a taxable income much more than his, and I nearly had a heart attack and wished I'd asked some questions before I walked up the aisle. Is the business going to pay for our children's education? What happens to me if something happens to my partner? And I see some terrible situations around this. I can actually remember asking that question. I married into a farming family and I married the youngest of 4. And that question was asked, what happens if something happens to him? Because he was in partnership with his parents and brother. And my parents-in-law said, well, you'll be all right, dear. Well, I'd studied law and I'd seen a bit of you'll be all right, dear, not so all right, dear. And so it wasn't great, that conversation around the family table, working out how that's going to be. So I said to my father-in-law, so John, if something happens to Rod, do you want me in business with you? You can imagine the squirming. He wanted to say, no, thank you very much, but he felt he couldn't quite say it. But we actually need to have those conversations because we need to choose who we're in business with. We don't need that to be by default. And I didn't necessarily want to be in partnership with them either. Surprise, surprise, I didn't actually marry them for their farm. So I think we've got to think a little bit more seriously about some of these things that are actually creating fear in the background. So we need to have conversations about asset protection in the right context. So mums, what do mums across Australia want? They want family harmony. They want to be fair to all their children, unlike the blokes, they know exactly how many children they've had. I want to be able to live where I choose for as long as I like. I want to be financially secure and not dependent on the ups and downs of the farm. And really this is really important to women, and to really find out what financial security means to each one. You can't assume that financial security looks like this for this one and the next one and the one after. It's individual, and we need to be very clear about that. I want to spend some special time with family, friends and grandchildren, and maybe travel. And then we get to dads, who are really the marshmallows that we fell in love with and married, and we know that they care just as much and need support in this process. They're scared about getting old and not sure about what comes next. I know I have to face change and let go, but how am I going to do it? What am I going to do if I can't work anymore? The farm has been my life's work, my hobby, that's all I've done. My wife wants to do other things and I'm not so sure I want to. What's going to happen when I go? I want to know that everyone is going to be happy. And I can feel I'm getting older. It doesn't feel good, and having a use-by date scares me. And I think for many people, they won't enter a room to have the discussions around succession planning because they actually think that they're going to be told that they have a use-by date. And so that's pretty scary and pretty confronting. But actually, when we combine the wisdom of those people with experience with the youth and enthusiasm and fire in the belly of the next generation, that's a powerful combination that no corporate will ever match. And so we need to think seriously about it. Communication strategies are vitally important, and if there's one thing that I hope you will take from this presentation is the importance of having platforms for communication to differentiate between business and personal. So they're basic things that the corporates do to death. They have meetings to death. What we need to do in our family businesses is really implement and prioritise platforms for communication. So on-farm operationally, or in our businesses operationally, then our management meetings, and then at a higher level, our strategic meetings. And that's where we need to include usually most of our family because they are stakeholders. If something were to happen to some of us tomorrow, then there'll be other people at that table. So they need to be at that table early so that they actually understand what's going on, need to be educated, need to prepare for what's coming. And the other thing I wanted you to have a think about is that conflict is normal. What sets us apart is actually how we manage conflict. If we were all clones of each other, we wouldn't have conflict. But we're not, so we have it. So anyone who sits there and says we don't have any conflict in our family is in la-la land. Of course we have conflict, but we need to have some mechanisms for conflict resolution, that communication platform in place, and therefore we will handle conflict differently, and that conflict will be a learning opportunity. And in most families, our differences are where our creativity sits, it's where our great ideas come from, and it's really where support sits. So if we can actually think about conflict differently and handle it in a more effective way and just see it as normal, then it will actually not be something we try to avoid or run away from, which is also why many people don't face succession planning, because they're so dead scared of what hornet's nest they're going to actually take the lid off. Retirement and having an exit strategy. So that doesn't mean going to the coast to die. That actually means getting clear about how we are going to fund ourselves, what we are going to be doing for the remainder of our lives, and assume we're going to live to be very old. And it's important that we clearly articulate this, because when we don't do this, we're actually the greatest blockage to succession, because we get in the way, because we haven't prepared for ourselves, and therefore we stand in the way of the next generation. So as business owners, this is a real responsibility if we actually see our business as an intergenerational business which we wish to continue. So this is a responsibility we have, and something that's left unaddressed. Roles and responsibilities need to be very clear with a reward and pay system in place. And too often we see there's a lack of clarity around that. So I'm not telling you to become over corporatised, but I am suggesting that we need more structure. We need to see structure as our friend. And the successful businesses in Australia today are actually the ones who do see structure as a friend, and they prioritise their generational longevity. And giving structure going forward is vitally important. We didn't need it as mum and dad businesses, but we absolutely need it as we grow our businesses. And if our businesses are truly focused on continuity, then our businesses are truly focused on growth. And with growth comes this requirement. And it actually helps the next generation understand they need the structure more than past generations ever needed it. And so it's important to start to think about how we can implement this in our businesses. Business policies must be documented, and good policies build trust within our family businesses. Where we don't have these in place, we leave ourselves open to what I call landmines, those petty, pathetic issues that actually blow up the very best businesses and the very, very best families, because we actually haven't sat down and taken the time to reach consensus and therefore write something on a page. It is that simple. Sometimes it takes some thinking, but that lack of preparedness to do so actually means we're not managing our risks. And risk management is a vital aspect of our business planning going forward. So please consider, your people are your key to success. And in family business, those people are the people we love the most in the world, our families. This is actually what the best operators are doing. Remember the power of time. It's the eighth wonder of the world. And if we begin early, whether we're thinking about preparing for the next generation, whether we're thinking about putting something away for our retirement, the power of time is one of the most amazing things that we have at our disposal, and too often we leave it too late and the options are not there for us. Be proactive, start this process before there is pain or issues within the family business, and doing something is always better than nothing at all. I passionately believe that there are opportunities in rural Australia and in agriculture today that we haven't seen in my generation, which To some it's not long, to others it's a while. And I think that the key to us being able to take up these opportunities is in preparing our families and in preparing our businesses so that we are ready. We're clear about our purpose. We've got our heads up and the opportunities are there for us. And so therefore we become the type of business that can be partnered or invested with. What it also gives us is the power to say no. If something doesn't fit and we've got a clear purpose, we have the power to say no. And so those opportunities that are awash out there at the moment with regard to capital pouring into this country, we have to prepare ourselves so that we can partner with those opportunities. Otherwise, we'll go through another cycle and there'll be less of us here to say that we were there, we were ready, and we lived to fight another day. And just to finish, Warren Buffett's famous saying, someone's sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree a long time ago. Thank you very much.